Can I fix it for food? They shamed the hungry black man, not knowing he was a racing legend. Comment below from which city you're watching and hit the subscribe button for more videos. He stood outside the diner, his clothes torn, his shoes barely holding together, his hands trembling not just from hunger, but from the weight of humiliation. People passed him as if he were invisible. Others stared long enough only to sneer, whisper, or laugh. And when he finally gathered the courage to step inside, clutching at his stomach, he didn't ask for money. He didn't beg for charity. All he said was, "Can I fix something? Can I work for food?" But instead of compassion, laughter filled the air. A group of well-dressed customers turned their heads, mocking his voice, mimicking his words. The waitress rolled her eyes, as if his very presence was an insult. One man smirked and muttered loudly, "Fix something? Look at him. He can't even fix himself." The humiliation stung sharper than hunger. Each chuckle, each insult pressed down on him like a weight he had carried for years. He had faced battles before, battles far greater than this. But here, stripped of everything, judged only by his skin, his poverty, his silence, the cruelty cut deeper than ever. And yet, there was something no one in that diner could have guessed. Beneath the ragged clothes, behind the weary eyes, was a man who once lived a life they could only dream of. A man who had flown down racetracks at impossible speeds. A man whose name had once drawn cheers, whose victories had lit up headlines, whose very presence had demanded respect. But now, to them, he was nothing. Just another hungry, broken black man they could laugh at before returning to their meals. As he stood there, humiliated, his eyes locked onto theirs, something unspoken passed through the room. A tension, a sense that the story wasn't over, that this stranger wasn't who they thought he was. Because the truth, his truth, was about to shatter every assumption they made. What happens when a man they dismiss as worthless reveals a past that could silence an entire room? What happens when the people who mocked him discover they weren't laughing at a beggar, but at a legend? Stay with me. Because what unfolded in that diner was not just about hunger, or work, or even respect. It was about dignity. It was about racism. And it was about a secret that would leave every single person who mocked him stunned into silence. The moment they discovered who he really was, changed everything. He wasn't always invisible. There was a time when the roar of engines drowned out every doubt in his mind, when his name flashed across billboards, when fans leaned over barriers just to glimpse him walking toward the car that bore his number. Back then, Marcus Johnson wasn't the homeless guy outside the diner. He was Marcus, the Flash, Johnson, a name whispered in racing circles as one of the fastest, sharpest drivers the sport had ever seen. But that was years ago. Life, with its cruel twists, had stripped everything away. Now Marcus woke each morning on a park bench near the city's riverfront, the mist chilling his bones before the sun rose. He folded his blanket, one he'd dug out of a donation bin, and tucked it neatly into a plastic bag, as if order could hold back the chaos of his life. He washed his face at a public fountain, avoiding his reflection in the water. Hunger gnawed at him more often than not. Still, there was dignity in the way he carried himself, an invisible thread of pride that no one could see but everyone somehow felt when he walked past. It was on one of those mornings that she noticed him. Claire Whitmore was unlike anyone Marcus had encountered in years. A young journalist in her late 20s, she carried herself with a quiet curiosity. She was white, well-dressed, and, unlike most people who passed Marcus, she didn't avert her gaze. Their first encounter was simple. She dropped a cup of hot coffee on the bench beside him, muttered, "You look like you could use this," and hurried away before he could refuse. Marcus hadn't even said thank you. Pride kept his words locked inside, but the warmth of that coffee stayed with him the entire day. Over the next few weeks, Claire appeared more often, sometimes with food, sometimes with questions. At first, Marcus resisted. He wasn't some charity project, but Claire wasn't just anyone. She had a way of listening that didn't make him feel pitied. Slowly, against his better judgment, he opened up in fragments. A sentence here, a story there. Never the full truth. Not yet. She learned he loved engines. She learned his eyes lit up at the mention of speed. She noticed the way he watched cars. On the highway, not with longing, but with a kind of intimate understanding. as though he could hear the story of each vehicle in the sound of its tires. Claire didn't push, but she sensed it. Marcus was more than what the world saw, and so their unlikely friendship grew. They began to sit together in the evenings, sharing sandwiches on the park bench. She'd talk about her deadlines and interviews. He'd chuckle at her stories, his laugh deep and rich, surprising even himself. Somewhere in those quiet moments, a bond began to form. But outside that small bubble of trust, the world was harsher. Whenever Claire was seen sitting with Marcus, people stared. Some whispered. One man walking by scoffed loudly. "Don't get too close, sweetheart. You'll catch something." Claire had flushed with embarrassment and anger, but Marcus had simply lowered his eyes, used to it. What Claire didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Society's cruelty wasn't done with Marcus. The world wasn't ready to see him for who he truly was. Not yet. And the day she decided to dig deeper into his past, everything would change. Because Marcus's story wasn't just about survival. It was about a fall from glory so steep it seemed impossible to climb back. It was about prejudice, betrayal, and secrets long buried. And soon, the world would learn the truth. That the man they mocked was no ordinary homeless soul. He was a legend hiding in plain sight. Andre Collins had learned to live quietly, to keep his head low, to let the world walk past him. But with Claire by his side, he began to feel something he thought was long gone. Visibility. Not fame, not applause, just the simple act of being seen. Yet the world didn't like what it saw. It began subtly. The cashier at a corner store, who once ignored Andre, now smirked at Claire each time she bought him food. The barista at a cafe, upon spotting Andre waiting outside for her, leaned across the counter and whispered just loud enough, "You're better than this. Don't waste yourself." Claire heard it. Andre pretended he didn't. But soon the whispers turned to words, and the words to actions. One afternoon, Claire invited Andre into a small bookstore cafe where she often wrote her articles. He hesitated at the door, his worn clothes and tired shoes marking him as out of place. But she smiled, urging him in. For a moment, he let himself believe he belonged. The moment didn't last. A man at the next table wrinkled his nose, muttering, "Something about the smell." A woman pulled her handbag closer to her chest. When Claire went to order 2 coffees, the manager approached Andre with a forced smile. "Sir, we have a policy here, reserved for paying customers only." His voice was low, but sharp enough to cut. Andre stood up quietly, but Claire returned mid-conversation. "He's with me," she said firmly, her eyes flashing. The room fell silent. Andre felt heat crawl up his neck, not from shame, but from the weight of every pair of eyes staring. He pulled his cap low and stepped outside before she could argue further. The humiliation stung, but it was only the beginning. Days later, Claire convinced Andre to join her for a charity gala. It wasn't fancy, just a fundraiser hosted by her newspaper. But for Andre, it felt like stepping onto another planet. The suits, the gowns, the glasses of champagne, every detail screamed a world he no longer belonged to. Still, Claire stayed close, introducing him as a friend. That word, friend, burned in the ears of people who couldn't see beyond his skin or his clothes. A man in a tailored tuxedo chuckled as he passed, his voice dripping with disdain. Didn't. No, this was open to all walks of life. Laughter followed. Claire snapped back, but Andre placed a hand on her arm, silently begging her to let it go. But he couldn't let go of the tightening in his chest, the echoes of old battles he thought he'd left behind. The world hadn't forgotten him, but not for the reasons he hoped. When people looked at Andre now, they didn't see the legend who once dominated racetracks. They saw a hungry black man who didn't belong, and still, Andre endured. He carried himself with quiet dignity. He smiled when Claire spoke. He kept his stories to himself, until that night at the diner. The night he walked in, stomach empty, pride fraying at the edges. The night he asked only for work, not charity. The night laughter and cruelty filled the room. The night everything changed. The diner was warm, glowing with neon lights outside, smelling of grease and coffee inside. For most people, it was comfort. For Andre Collins, it was a battlefield. He stood at the counter, shoulders squared, voice low but steady. "Can I fix something for food?" His words carried no desperation, just dignity. He wasn't begging. He was offering. The room fell silent for a beat. Then came the laughter. Man in a pressed shirt leaned back in his booth, grinning at his companions. "Fix something? Look at you. You can't even fix your life." Another customer snorted. The waitress rolled her eyes. Even the cook peeked out from the kitchen, smirking. Claire's face flushed with anger as she rushed to his side. "Enough!" "He's with me." But her words only fed the fire. Someone muttered, "Figures. Of course she'd bring him in here." Another voice chimed in, louder. "You're lowering yourself, sweetheart. Look at him. He doesn't belong here." Andre felt the heat of humiliation crawling up his neck. Each laugh, each insult was a whip against scars that had never healed. He clenched his fists, willing himself to stay silent, to endure as he always had. But then, one of the men stood blocking his path. "Tell you what," he said, grinning cruelly. "Why don't you race me to the door, champ?" "Oh, wait, I guess you can't." The word race hung in the air like a match over gasoline. Andre's eyes flickered, just for a second. Claire saw it, that shift, that unspoken spark of who he used to be. Her breath caught. "Andre?" The laughter grew louder, the taunts sharper. But Andre no longer heard them. His mind was back on the track, the roar of engines, the blur of lights, the moment he crossed. Finished lines that seemed impossible. They thought they were mocking a nobody. They had no idea they were taunting a legend. Andre straightened. For the first time in years, he lifted his head high, meeting every pair of eyes in that diner. His voice cut through the room, low but fierce. "You think I don't belong here. You think I'm nothing. But once, you cheered my name. You held signs with my face on them. You screamed for me when I flew down the track at 200 miles an hour. My name is Andre Collins, and I wasn't just a man who fixed cars. I was the man who won them." The diner froze. Forks clattered. A woman gasped. The men who laughed were struck silent, their smiles fading into disbelief. Claire's hand trembled against her lips, tears burning her eyes. Andre stood taller, as if shedding the weight of years in a single breath. His voice, once buried by humiliation, now filled the room with undeniable truth. And yet, what came next would test them all, because revealing the truth was only the beginning. The diner was silent after Andre's words. The very air seemed to shift, heavy with shame, awe, and disbelief. For years his name had been forgotten, buried beneath whispers of failure and the cruelty of time. But tonight, in the most unlikely place, Andre Collins had reclaimed it. One of the men who mocked him stumbled back into his seat, his smirk erased. A woman whispered, almost to herself, "Andre Collins, I remember him. He was a champion." Slowly, recognition rippled through the crowd. Faces shifted from ridicule to shock, some even to regret. But Andre didn't linger on them. He turned to Claire, whose eyes brimmed with tears, not of pity, but of pride. For years she had known him as a quiet, weathered soul trying to hold onto dignity in a world that had taken much from him. But now she saw the man he had been, and still was. Resilient, fearless, unforgettable. The diner manager cleared his throat, suddenly uneasy. "Mr. Collins, I didn't realize. If I had known—" Andre cut him off with a calm but firm voice. "You shouldn't need to know someone's history to treat them with respect. Dignity doesn't come with fame. It comes with being human." That line silenced the room once more. No one dared laugh now. Claire slid her arm through Andre's, walking him out of the diner with her head high. For the first time in years, Andre wasn't walking out as the homeless man or the beggar. He was walking out as himself. Word spread quickly. Someone in the diner had filmed the confrontation on their phone. Within hours, Andre's speech was on social media, his name trending across the internet. Clips of his races resurfaced, his victories, his interviews, his moments of glory. People remembered. The legend was alive again. But this wasn't about fame anymore. Andre didn't seek pity or a comeback. What moved the world was his strength, the quiet dignity of a man who endured humiliation and rose above it with truth. Messages poured in. Former teammates, fans, Even reporters reached out. Old rivals admitted respect they had never spoken aloud. And strangers, ordinary people, shared how Andre's story gave them courage to hold their heads high in the face of cruelty. Andre could have basked in it, but instead, he chose something greater. He partnered with Claire to start a foundation, helping homeless men and women gain skills, opportunities, and most importantly, dignity. They called it Finish Line Hope. The men who mocked him in the diner? Some never changed, but others couldn't escape the weight of their shame. One of them, weeks later, showed up at the foundation, hat in hand. He apologized, not in public, not for attention, but quietly, man to man. Andre accepted. Not because he had to, but because carrying anger was a race he didn't want to run anymore. Claire's love never wavered. If anything, it deepened. She stood by Andre not for his past trophies, but for the way he carried himself in the face of hate. That night in the diner had tested them both, but it proved something unshakable. True love doesn't bow to prejudice. Their story became more than a scandal or a viral video. It became a lesson. Parents told it to their children. Teachers shared it in classrooms. Preachers wove it into sermons. It wasn't just about Andre Collins, the racing legend. It was about how cruelty exposes itself, and how dignity can disarm. Years later, Andre wasn't rich. He didn't suddenly regain all he'd lost. But what he gained was far more lasting. He became a mentor to young racers who grew up poor, just as he had. He taught them not only how to drive, but how to rise above insults, setbacks, and injustice. And the foundation? It grew. What started as a small community project spread to other cities. Andre and Claire weren't just helping people find work. They were restoring humanity to those the world had cast aside. Whenever Andre spoke, people listened. Not because of his fame, but because he carried truth. He reminded everyone that greatness isn't about the finish line you cross, but the battles you fight along the way.